My belief is that, we don't need a break from distractions. We need a break from focus. So we need to pull away from the narrow-minded way that we're living. And it's a beautiful way we're living, but there's more possible.
Welcome to Warriors at Work. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. Warriors at Work is a place where everyone in the workplace can come together, gain insight, encouragement, tell stories, connect, and share wisdom. We are a place of like-minded people at different stages of life, all coming together with a shared interest of enlightening and inspiring one another. If you're interested in going from the predictable to the potent, and you want to find your warrior magic, step into the journey with us. Welcome to Warriors at Work. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me at the Warriors at Work podcast. This is Jeannie Coomber, your host. For all my doers out there who live for production, execution, delivery to other people, we are here to punctuate the pause. That's an expression my guest, Brie Doyle, who is the founder of She Glows Retreats, uses. And she offers that up as a way to create space for your inner life through retreating. No, you do not need a fancy location or a special teacher. It's all right here. And Brie is a well-known yoga and meditation teacher, an international retreat leader, creator. She's an author of a new book, which we get into. She's a mom, she's a wife, and she is a powerhouse advocate for self-care. She has worked with middle school students to executives at Google, and she's an expert at creating mental and emotional wellness curriculums for groups. So let's stop the toxic pace and give ourselves a timeout. Welcome to your retreat. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Warriors at Work. It's me, Jeannie. So excited to have you here today. Brie Doyle, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation, Brie. Cannot wait to get into this.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So when we first connected, you shared this really cool expression with me where I thought this is where we could start. A little bit of a circuitous route on retreating, but I think it's right on point, which is the wound is where the light comes in. Mm-hmm. And it was related to a time in your life when you were depleted spiritually. And I think this is a really important place for us to start, because I think we have to set the table around why did you get into this world of retreating and really what it means to you. So share with us where that comes from.
Yeah. So I had been retreating for much of my life. I was raised a spiritual person. I've always connected with spirituality, but once I had kids, things changed a little bit, and it was hard for me to pull away to do retreats regularly. And I hit a place in my life where I was just, I have 3 kids. My youngest son was 15 months old, and I was just bottoming out. I just felt tired and depressed and sad. And it was for the first time in my life, I felt myself, asking questions like, what's wrong with me? Seeking a label almost, if that makes sense. And I couldn't figure out what to do. And so I I just stayed with it. I had no option. I couldn't go anywhere or do anything. I just kind of felt horrible for a while. And then finally I remembered, I had this practice of retreating in my younger life. So maybe if I tried that now, maybe it could offer some redemption. So I left. I went on a week-long retreat by myself in Costa Rica. And what I realized when I was on that retreat was not that there was anything wrong with me, not that I had, I was suffering from something, but that I needed more of myself. That was it. I just had been hemorrhaging all of my energy on everyone around me. And I just needed space for myself. And so I rebuilt myself on that retreat.
Was that a hard decision? I would imagine with 3 young kids. I mean, I'm even trying to imagine just to get to that place to say, wow, this is actually what I need. I'm starting to see the signs mentally, physically, emotionally. Then I have to have a conversation with my husband. Yeah, to facilitate that.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that. Was that a difficult thing to do, to give to yourself?
I felt guilty, like all of us. We're so kind of attached to our roles and our all the things we have to do, whether it's work or family, whatever it is. We're so ingrained to stick with those things and to put all our energy into that. So it was difficult to pull away. And once I made the decision, I felt so excited. But as it came closer, I felt horrified. I was like, oh my, I can't leave right now. um,
Mm.
but thankfully, I left. I'm so grateful. That's always the hardest part, is like actually getting yourself out the door. And then once you've done it, you're like, okay, this is going to be a good thing.
What's amazing too is probably like imagining who the person was when they were leaving and
Yeah.
then who the person was when you came back. So when you walk back into the door and into your home, back into your life, like what were a couple of things that immediately shifted for you?
My sex life. I need to
Number
go.
one.
Yeah, number one. You're just together all the time, and sometimes a little bit of space is actually great for a relationship, right? So
Mm.
that was really positive. I had so much more energy because I had taken care of my basic needs. I had slept as much as I need to. I read all day, so I was feeling inspired and excited. I had meditated regularly, so I was feeling really grounded in who I was, and I just felt really inspired. And so, when you come home with that kind of energy, it's contagious and it carries not just into your family, but to everyone around you. So, they're tiny shifts, but people feel them, you know?
Yeah.
So
Well, I'd love to unpack a little bit about the energy piece because that is so that and retreating go hand in hand. And of course, I'm going to put the overlay of COVID right now.
yeah, right.
And I think everybody that's watching or listening, we're talking about retreating in a lot of different forms here. It isn't necessarily, I must get on a plane and go to Costa Rica.
Right.
The things that you just highlighted are available within the space that we're all operating in. So, the word retreat and pandemic don't usually go hand in hand. But when I sit with the word and I actually looked it up and thought, what the heck does it really mean? And it is the act of going back or within or away. So it's creating space. So how do you describe retreating? And when you think about the world that we're all in right now,
Yeah.
anybody watching or listening, what would you say to them?
To answer your first question, it really is just picking a period of time and stepping away from your day-to-day life to give space for your soul, if that makes sense, to give space for energy, to give space for the subtleties of life that slowly are depleted over time in our regular life. I call it constructive escapism.
Ooh, constructive escapism. Everybody's going to write that down. I need some constructive escapism.
Right. Because my belief is that, we don't need a break from distractions. We need a break from focus. So we need to pull away from the like narrow-minded way that we're living. And it's a beautiful way we're living, but there's more possible. So in light of COVID, what I think is, the great thing is that you really can retreat by yourself. You don't have to join an organized program. You can rent a cabin in the woods. You can go to your cousin's condo in the city. You can, it doesn't have to be any specific place. You don't have to have any specific manual to follow. Truly, this is just making space for yourself. And of course, in my book, I detail lots of things to include in your retreat to facilitate the most transformation. But truthfully, when you strip all of that away, it's just making space for yourself. That's it.
So let's talk about transformation because that is what I feel is the extension of retreating.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it in terms of there's probably levels of transformation that happen. Maybe it's just like, wow, I have more focus and energy. And, some of the things that I shared on the Facebook Live is this idea of somebody sent me a mini retreat box. And for an hour and a half, I was doing arts and crafts. I had a mask on. I was eating the chocolates. And I felt unbelievable afterwards. And I had so much more attention and patience that I didn't have previously. But then I also think of other levels of transformation when people do choose to get out of their environment. So I think what would be helpful is first, let's talk about what are the signs that a retreat might be coming. And then we can talk about the levels of transformation. So let's talk signs.
Sure. So Signs that you know it's time for a retreat. If you're feeling depleted, exhausted, you're quick to be angry or frustrated or regularly feeling sad, these are all clues to yourself that there's some lack of alignment, right?
Mm.
Something is not right on the inside. So to me, those are telltale signs that, like, okay, I don't need any external thing. And that's what we typically try to do. It's like we're feeling crappy. We try to bring something external to fix it, right? My message is totally different. You don't need the external things. You actually need to go in. So when when you're feeling those emotions, it's time to step away. Thankfully I've gotten to the point now where I do it proactively. So I have an agreement with myself every 6 months. I go on retreat. And now I use it more for inspiration. So I'm about to start a new creative project here really soon. And so now I know that I've got to go away before I embark on this creative project, because that's how I hear myself. That's how I make space for things to come to me, as opposed to me forcing things to happen.
What you just said was so important. I
Mm.
go away so I can hear myself.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I notice, particularly in this climate, is we try to think our way often out of
Yeah.
situations,
Yeah.
not recognizing that you can think all day long. You may be faced with the same scenario over and over again, and the data is the data. But
Yeah.
just that process of stepping away
Yeah.
gets more of your brain, more of your soul involved in the conversation. And I think it's really important what you just said. So
Thanks.
love that articulation of the signs. So tell us what a retreat is like. Let's
Yeah.
talk about some of like the experiences, the texture.
Yeah. Every retreat is so different. And for personally, for myself, I find that, I tend to go to the same place to retreat just because it's close by my home. I know the whole deal. Though every time I go, I have a completely different experience, which is what's so great. That's my internal kind of coming out, if that makes sense. So when you
Mhm.
go, based on what you're working on or dealing with, that will expose itself to you on your retreat. And that's the beauty of retreat, is that you can do the same place, the same thing every time, and you'll have a new experience each time. So my belief, this is what I talk a lot about in my book, is that there is an internal emotional and energetic trajectory that happens to participants while they're retreating. And it happens the same every time. You go through the same emotional and energetic stages while you're on retreat. So based on that, you can kind of come to anticipate certain stages. So one stage, for instance, is the leaving. It's hard, right? There are a million reasons why you're going to try to talk yourself out of leaving. Once you've actually made the decision to go, you're like, "Ugh, I've got too much work,
Yes.
the kids, whatever it is, it's gonna present itself." So before you leave, and that's a stage, knowing that that's a stage of retreat is actually helpful, because when that comes up for you and you're like, "Gosh, maybe I should just cancel," that, like, "Oh, I'm just kind of going through this. This is what happens." So that's one phase, and then you get on retreat, and there's this, you're so excited, you're finally there, you're doing this. There's this huge surge in energy and emotion and excitement. And so again, anticipating that is really important. And then I'll just say one more stage that happens. I won't talk through all of them, but one more stage is then you do what I call hitting the wall. There's going to be a point on your retreat when you hit a wall. And the reason for this is because you come in bringing the energy from home, whatever it is, like that achiever, that busy, that whatever energy you tend to operate with at home. And then you're on retreat and it's like a halt. And you're like, I don't like this, like squirm, like I'm uncomfortable. And we show that we project in all different ways. It might be, I hate this instructor, the weather's uncomfortable, my bed's so hard, and I have a soft bed at home. It comes out in all sorts of funky ways. But the good thing in knowing that is that this is a stage of retreat that you go through. And this is part of the process. It's essential to you getting to the higher stages that come later.
You know what my brain immediately went to? I would be that person that I'd be looking at the itinerary, like, I need to do all of this by 12. And then by 2 o'clock, here's how I want to feel.
Yeah.
And then by 4 o'clock, here's what I'm going to be doing to make sure that my feeling still is my feeling. And then
Yeah.
by this time, so I'm like mentally prepare.
Yeah.
But what happens is I've set up all sorts of expectations, because in
Yes.
my business life, so the life that I'm operating in, there's a lot of control, there's a lot of predictability to it. And I think it's really helpful because you can psychologically, once you name it, you normalize it.
Yes.
So how you've articulated that is so important. But I would so be that girl where you'd be like, time out, Jeannie. You're
And
spinning.
Right. And the good news, I mean, everybody, so many people do that. It's a classic pattern. There are classic patterns people come in bringing. It's just human nature. We all have those patterns and we need them at home and they're important. But the beauty of retreat is it allows you to strip those away. So like the layers of an onion, you start to kind of unfold a little bit to get to the deeper work, which is why I believe retreats are so valuable. It's why you're really there. So,
So let's talk about retreating in COVID.
yeah, yeah.
What's the deal?
So every state is so different. I mean, we're fortunate that like I can go and stay in a hotel room. I can go and stay in a cabin and it's safe and it's fine. So it's different for different people. You truly can retreat in your basement. I mean, it doesn't have to be anywhere specific. And that's the great news about retreating is it's a practice you can use anywhere. You can go camping and that can be a retreat. So I think, again, it's just about creativity and flexibility. I think it's just as necessary, if not more, for those of us who are now with our families all the time, or if you're alone, if you're by yourself right now, I would suggest leaving, staying and doing a retreat in the space that you spend all your time. I don't know. I think that the pattern interrupt of finding a new space could offer a flush of inspiration. So it's still possible and definitely necessary during COVID.
So let's talk about your book here too. You Should Leave Now, going on retreat to find your way back to yourself. And you're really tapping into a lot of it here as we're talking, which, by the way, the foreword was written by Dr. Christiane Northrup, which you can mention in a moment. So tell us about the book.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So my book has a couple different sections to it. The first section is really about the need for retreat. My intention is to put retreating on the map as a valuable form of self-care for people. So it's not just practiced by devout religious people, which is kind of how traditionally it's been. So I want it to be a tool that everybody can access. So the first part of the book is really the call to retreating, why it's necessary for all of us. The second part of the book is how to. So, do you join an organized program or do you go it alone? So kind of figuring out the logistics for you. And it changes every time you do a retreat. So really walking you through that. The third part of the book is that internal trajectory, that emotional and energetic trajectory that I spoke about. I have a ton of stories. I have past client stories that kind of typify each spot. And then the final section is about transitioning home, because there is a real something that happens when you transition back home. In order to make your retreat live beyond just that 1 week or that one weekend, there are certain things you can do to make it extend much further. So,
What was the part of the book that really lit you up, that it was just your favorite part to express?
the first part, I read constantly, so I have tons of research in the book, and I'm a fiction writer as well. So each chapter starts with a story, a personal story. So it was really fun to write, and also I love digging into the research and having real reasons and rationale for people who are more analytical minded, for why retreating is not just a woo-woo practice. It's critical for those of us who are interested in creativity and productivity and all the things that matter to most of us.
Yeah, so that was going to be a follow-up question, because you'd shared that with me as we were preparing for this, is there's a lot of data and research behind this. So what are the key metrics for anybody that's listening that's like, sounds great, I don't have the time, and that sounds like an indulgence. That doesn't sound like something that's attuned to my self-care. What would you say?
Well, again, if you're someone who's driven by productivity and outcomes, then I think retreating needs to be a part of your life. There was a writer actually named Graham Wallace in the 1920s, I believe. He wrote a book called The Art of Thought, and he was the first person to really elucidate the creative process and how it happens. And he said there are 4 phases of this process, and the first phase is preparation. So we're bringing in all kinds of information. The second phase is incubation. So you kind of sit with that information. You're not focusing on it, but you're sitting with it. You're just allowing ideas to come and go. The next phase is illumination. And this is where like the aha moments come, the breakthroughs come. And then the final phase is verification. This is where you test your creative idea into the real world. Like, does this make sense? Is this going to work? And my belief is that we don't hold space for incubation at all in our life. We just move completely from like taking information in, and then we're supposed to have like produce. And there's no sense of like holding that space for like creativity, and this is, again, this is the guy who put the trajectory of creativity on the map. So we've got to hold space for that incubation, and I believe that's exactly what retreating does. So it heightens your productivity. I know you told a great story about that the other day too, after your retreat box, how much more productive and creative you felt.
I just felt sharper. I felt like the calm and the peace, and I would have made the argument probably 2 or 3 years ago that if I slow down, I lose my edge.
Yeah.
That feels counterproductive or suboptimal to me if you're asking me to take my foot off the gas. Because again, that's all my mental modeling, that's my conditioning. I've been taught some of those behaviors. And of course I'm working on my own evolution here and challenging some of those assumptions, but immediately the takeaway was I had capacity for more thought. I had capacity for more decisions. I had ideas even when I was playing with yarn that I didn't have consciousness to before. So for me, it was a huge aha how 90 minutes, I couldn't only imagine if I took a full day or 2 days and had the discipline to put something like that on my calendar, which I think that's another piece to this is, I don't want anybody watching or listening to be like, oh, that's a nice to have. No, this needs to be strategically a part of your experience the same way that you make plans and plan for projects and execution and strategy and deliverables for everyone else. It is a strategic part of your experience, which I'd love to hear. Well, like, what are some of the key metrics and data points that you make reference to as it relates to research?
Yeah. So I talk a lot about Joe Dispenza and the work that he shared about the different brainwave states. I think, again, there are 5 different brainwave states, and I get into this in detail in my book, but we live from that beta brainwave state, which is kind of functional, right? Constantly in this functional state. But on retreat, we can access those deeper, those theta brainwaves, those ones that are harder to access in day-to-day life, the ones that we don't really make space for when we're so connected back home. And again, the benefit of that to our output is significant. So that's another one that I talk about a lot is the brainwave states. And then I also talk a lot about how our culture has changed as a result of religious practice. In the past 20 years, participation has dropped 20% in, temple, in churches, in mosques, in all kinds of religion, which is fine. But my question then becomes, so where do we make space for spirit? Where do we hold the space to kind of do that internal work that we used to do in churches, that we used to do in synagogues, that we used to do in temple, that now where? It's just eaten up by work. So it's to me, it's we have to hold space for our spirit. I mean, again, it can sound really woo-woo, but the data is there. If we're interested in productivity and that's what drives us, then it's got to be there. If we're interested in connecting with the divine, then let that be your driver. I mean, whatever your angle is, we all need space, right? That's what we need more than anything.
Especially now.
Yeah, especially now.
You talk about this idea of 9 elements of a retreat in your book. And I would love for you to share the elements that are foundational. But I also want you to share a few that people really struggle with.
So 9 elements. So it's taken a lot of time to kind of come up with these, a lot of practice of my own practice and hosting retreats to boil it down to these 9. But what I would say is there are a lot of retreats out there that are positioning themselves as retreats, but feel more like a party. There's nothing wrong with a party. There's nothing wrong with a girl's vacation or a family trip. But I would say, a lot of people say to me, well, I just took a vacation with my girlfriends. And it's like a retreat is different than that. So that's why I spell out these elements really clearly, because a retreat has a very different intention than like partying with your friends or, reading trashy novels on the beach, all of which are fantastic. But a retreat is different. So that's why I've come up with these elements so that okay, if I'm going to create a retreat for myself, this is what needs to be included. I would say one of the foundational elements is reconnecting with your basic needs. Again, these are things that in life we kind of don't pay so much attention to, like getting proper sleep, eating nourishing food, being out in nature, putting our face in the sun and our feet in the dirt, really basic things that aren't priorities in our daily life because we're so busy and distracted. So that would be one, reconnecting with basic needs. And I say this at the very beginning of my retreats that I host. I say, hey, if you want to show up for a yoga class tomorrow, and that sounds really good to you, that's wonderful. But if you're sleep deprived, do not come to yoga. And again, it's hard for the achiever types to not show up for all the things, but it's important to take care of the primal, those basic necessities first, because we can't access deep energy if we don't meet our primal needs first. So that's one. And one that's really hard for people, I would say, is silence and other ascetic practice. I am a big believer that we live in a world of decadence. We're used to getting anything and everything at all times, right? We can access so much. So the practice for those of us who live in that world is to withhold something, right? So it's the opposite of what we're used to. We can get everything. So I use silence on my retreats. And if it's a week-long retreat, we have a whole day of silence. And I tee people up for this day. They know what they're doing during that day, but it's very intentional. But it's hard for people, right?
Oh my God, I can't even.
Yeah, but it's so, and for a weekend retreat, we just do a morning of silence. But the beauty is when you withhold something, the surge that comes afterwards is incredible. I mean, it's one of my favorite days. The day of silence is everybody's kind of doing their thing. And then the next day, the level of energy, that's the shift in the group, it's unbelievable. It's off the charts. So a lot of people hit their low on the day of silence, and a lot of people come out just exploding on the next day because they withheld. We don't realize how much energy we're outputting just by having a chat with someone at a gas station or talking with our children. But when you intentionally withhold, it's unbelievable the information that comes back to you.
That is brilliant. This idea of withholding, which my mind immediately thought it was a negative, but it's such a positive. And you're right. We go through our lives and we're constantly engaging, asking questions, paying attention. Doing what I do. Fortunately, I'm in the listening business, but a lot of times I have to have a lot of exchange.
Yeah.
And I never had awareness to that. There's tremendous benefit to just withholding. I think a lot of leaders are extraordinary at that. It also allows for you to truly listen to your own instincts on a decision.
Yes.
And the input around you.
Totally. And if you're committed to growth, and that's what retreats are about, we've got to push boundaries. And one of the levers to pull is that's something we can easily control. And it doesn't necessarily feel comfortable, but that's not the point, right? If growth is what we're committed to, then this gives you massive insight on yourself, on where you squirm, on what's uncomfortable, on why it's uncomfortable. This is how you get your data to make the decision about what needs to change. Retreats are like a bird's eye view of your life back home. They offer you that. So when you're doing this, you can actually take a minute and say, okay, this no longer is working for me, or this relationship might need to fizzle away, or I'm really interested in pursuing this, and those are the insights that come to you when you make space, when you hold silence.
Probably the hardest thing for anybody here who's in a high visibility role, high production. That is quite a concept. So tell me about who are the typical people that come to retreats, and how affordable is it? Because I think of what would it cost to go to Costa Rica, but I know you make mention of you can do this anytime, anywhere within the confines of what's ever available to you. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes. And again, it goes back to my mission, which is making this accessible to all people. So I think it just completely depends on what you're looking for. If you've never retreated before, I certainly think going with a good guide is helpful, just because then there are certain pitfalls. We might just fritter our time away on the internet, which is a common pattern, right? This is a pattern that we bring from home. And if we go on retreat, we get bored, we get uncomfortable, but if you're with a guide who knows how to recognize that and also plan for that, then you'll be held in a great environment. So it really just depends. But again, you can do all of this by yourself. So it runs the gamut, expensive, non-expensive. It just depends on what you're looking for. And I would say, everybody has a different intention for retreating. Some people are coming to heal. Some people are coming because they need to make space. I mean, I have a lot of actually business owners and CEOs and powerful folks coming because they're so used to planning and driving and doing all the doing that they want someone else to plan that part of it for them. So that's who a lot of people are on my events. But it changes. I also have moms who are like, I just need some space. I just need some time. And one of my commitments is that I'm not going to fill up your time. You have free time every single day. That's critical, in my opinion. I need you to have downtime. So I hold that space and I hold it firmly. That said, we work hard when it's curriculum time, and I'm there to push you. So again, my training is as a teacher. So I bring all kinds of modalities. We use like somatic release, we scream, we dance, we paint, we meditate. I mean, every modality that's possible we use because I want to bring people to their edge. So they go home not just with like a nice experience, but like a freaking transformation.
Bring them to your edge. Oh my God, I love that. That's like a Kundalini, a Kundalini practice,
Yes.
taking you to your edge.
Right.
Well, I'd love to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about you personally. And obviously this whole brand is about finding your warrior within, tapping into it, igniting it.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your journey. What are you looking to bring more into the world, but also what's your shadow side? What do you struggle with?
Yeah, this is a good question. Which one to start with? What I want to bring more into the world is, I guess I'm going to start with myself. I feel like we have both an inner purpose and an outer purpose. And so this kind of aligns with my struggle too. My hope in the next many years is to really hold space for my own inner evolution, my own consciousness expanding. And I know that sounds maybe kind of woo-woo, but one of the things that I found is that I am an ambitious person and I can lose myself in this work very easily because I love it so much. And I started with just one retreat, hoping to like fill one retreat. And now I have a full-blown business where I have a retreat every single month of the year, which is fantastic. But it's easy for me to lose myself in that a bit. And I really feel that I have to hold this, if I'm going to model this work and live this work in an authentic way, I have to hold the space for myself too. So that's a shadow side, is that I think I have this need to please and need to prove my worth, even though I know that that's not real. I inherently am worthy. And yet sometimes I get obsessed with this ambition of like creating and producing. And, I thrive in that kind of situation, but I also have to be really incredibly intentional about like living the work so that I can actually offer it in a positive way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. Well, it leads me to my last question.
Yeah.
So much of what we talk about here is this idea of what is your magic? What are the things that make you uniquely you? So anyone who's listening and experiencing this conversation and they're experiencing Brie, like, what's your magic?
Yeah, this is another great question. It gave me a lot of time to reflect. And my magic is that I am obsessed with growth and transformation. And as a result, I am constantly reading and taking things in and trying new things and adapting and strategizing. And as a result, I offer people incredible experiences because I know what it takes to create transformation. And again, my background is as a teacher. So I really think one of my strengths is teaching. And so again, creating these environments that I know will shift people's life. I think that's what my magic is. I was a really shy, introverted kid, younger and smaller as also. So I always observed, growing up, I was more of an observer. I wasn't a kid. I never raised my hand in class ever. That was like, wouldn't even consider it. So as a result, I've spent my whole life observing. And so I feel like I really understand and I see people. And so as a result, I know how to love them and I know how to help them because I really do believe that people are capable of so much. We just get in our own way. So I'm just here to help people, to create a container for people to experience transformation, not because they need me, because they need themselves. And I can create that environment for you.
Oh, I get emotional listening to you say that. I'm just so grateful that there's someone like you doing this level of work and this beautiful book that you've brought out into the world. If anybody's interested, you can go to Brie Doyle's website, pre-order it. I'm so excited to get it. I
Yeah.
cannot wait to dig in. And Brie, I'm so deeply grateful for you and your energy and all this amazing magic you're putting out into the world. So thank you so much for being in this conversation with me.
Thank you so much, Jeannie. I'm so honored to be here. I really appreciate what you're doing too. So thank you.
Thanks to everybody for listening to another episode of Warriors at Work and letting us be a part of your warrior journey. You can ask questions and make suggestions for future topics at jc@jeanniecoomber.com. Connect with me personally on LinkedIn and Instagram, and join us on the Warrior Conversations channel on YouTube and at the Warrior Magic Community page on Facebook. You can find links to all these places on my website, jeanniecoomber.com, and most importantly, be sure to tell friends about us, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes, Spreaker, and Spotify. It helps others find the show and puts more warrior magic out into the world.